Hi everyone, I'm back in the kitchen. I'm going to be doing the sourdough bread today. So if you can bear with me, this is the first time I've done this on camera. It's a very long process. So I'm going to try and put either a bunch of little videos up or I'm going to try and put them together. I'm not sure exactly how to do that, but here we go. We're going to start out with this video and we'll go from there and see how it goes. So in the last video, I'm going to put a playlist called The Lazy Kitchen Witch because that's what I am. I'm a lazy kitchen witch. I like to do things easy. I like really good food, but I don't necessarily want to take hours and hours doing stuff. However, I do love to spend hours doing bread. A lot of the hours that I spend doing bread actually is just waiting for it to rise. So that's why it's such a long process. So the thing with sourdough bread is a different beast from any other bread or yeast-based products that you've made. Or things that you've made with yeast, because most of us are using what's called the dry yeast. It comes in little packets, or it looks like little granules, that sort of thing. So that's commercial grade yeast. What we're dealing with is wild yeast. So I've got the jar that I started on day one, right from scratch. Today will be day 3 that I'm feeding it. So I'm not going to use this one, obviously, for the sourdough bread. It's not ready. But I just wanted to show you. So I'm going to move the camera here, and hopefully I get my angles right. I'm going to move the camera and show you already. I haven't fed it, but this is day 3, and all the bubbles that are already in there. So let's see if I can get this in there. Can you see that? It's bubbling up very nicely. Hopefully you saw that. Couldn't quite see what I was taping there. But like I said, it's already bubbling up. It was bubbling up after the first day, so that's good. And we're getting a really good starter going. And then I'm actually using my 10-year-old starter for the sourdough today, because this one is not ready. So I will take another half cup out of this one today and feed it back in with a half cup of flour and a half cup of water, give or take. And I could use, like I said, I could use that discard as a starter for a friend if I wanted to. I have a lot of starters, so sometimes it's good to have a friend who has a starter or who wants a starter. You can always give them one, because as you can see from yesterday's feeding, like my jar's way up there. It was down to about here, actually maybe a little less when I did that fried bread. It's come right back up again. So don't be afraid of discarding. I don't need to discard with this one anymore. I just use whatever I need in my bread or in my cooking or whatever. If I'm making pancakes or cinnamon buns or just regular old buns or sourdough, that sort of thing. So, like I said, sourdough is different from any other bread that you've made. First of all, you're going to find it's a very wet dough. It's a dough that's surprisingly delicate in the sense that it doesn't want to be handled a lot. So it's not a dough you're going to sit and knead and knead and knead. If you do that, you're going to make a brick. So it's not like other yeast that needs to be a lot of kneading. This is a wild yeast you're working with. And a naturally occurring yeast. So any recipe that you've seen for bread making, you can convert it to sourdough. However, it's good to know sort of the basics. So I've got here a chart for you called the baker's percentage. So this is what professional bakers use. They do it by weight. I'm going to do it in cups. I've got it all converted out and everything because, again, I'm the lazy kitchen witch. I don't have a scale. I did at one point, but I don't know where it went to. So I'm doing it by cups. You know, I kind of guesstimate, and my bread usually turns out pretty good. So this might be backwards to you, but this says 1,000 grams of flour. Now, if you want to get real nitpicky and do it the way actual bakers do it, go get a kitchen scale and weigh out your flour. Weigh your bowl first, so you know how much that weighs, and then add 1,000 grams to it, obviously. So 1,000 grams of flour, and the percentages are all based off of the flour, how much flour. So that's why they tend to use 1,000 grams, because then it's easier to know. So most bread or yeast-based recipes that you're going to have looked at in your cookbooks or online or whatever are all about the hydration, 80% hydration. Sourdough is already a really wet bread, or a wet dough, I mean, so you don't want 80%. When you're first starting out, you usually want about 70%. You can maybe go as high as 75, 78, somewhere in there. You're still going to be less than the 80%, no matter how good you get at it. And like I said in the earlier video, even professional bakers sometimes screw up sourdough because it can be a little bit of a hit and miss, but that's part of the excitement. And if it's a bit of a miss, like not this last time, but the time before that, I did make a little bit of a heavier bread by accident, but it was still good. Still ate it, toasted up nice, you know, that sort of thing. So like I said, most bread recipes are going to be 80% water or hydration of some kind, whether that includes eggs and milk or whatever you might put in there, okay? With sourdough, you're just dealing with flour and water, basically. That's it. So instead of 800 grams, which is what most recipes are going to call for water, you want 700 because you want 70%, right? So that's the baker's percentages, right? The starter is going to be about 150 grams starter. So you want about 15% of your starter. Now I'm going to convert that over to cups for you as well. And then about 20 grams or 2% of salt. That's a basic sourdough recipe. Very easy. And like I said, there's not a lot to it. It's water and flour, but it's all in the process of how you do it, kind of thing. So I'm going to get my board out because my bread's going to be resting on that for the first rest. So it is a bit of a process. It's a 6-hour process. Well, actually more than that. It's probably closer to 7 or 8 when you include the half-hour rest that I'm going to give it right after I mix it. And then there's every 2 hours you fold it over again and punch it down and that sort of thing for 3 times. And then there's a rest before, after you shape it, and then you do the final shape and then you cook. So there's a lot of steps, I know, but it's actually fairly easy once you get into it, and you can fit it into your day. You can slow down the process or speed it up depending on, you know, what your day is like, kind of thing. I do highly recommend a dough cutter or scraper. These things are the best. It's going to be your best friend because sourdough, unlike other doughs, doesn't like a lot of flour. Even though it is mostly flour and water, when you're putting it on your board or your counter to roll out or knead out or whatever, you do a little bit of kneading, not a whole lot though, very gentle, and I'm going to show you that. You're going to need this because it doesn't want a lot of flour because you're going to dry it out and you're going to make a brick. So there's lots of ways to make sourdough into a brick. So I'm going to show you how not to do that, hopefully. But like I say, even the best of the best sometimes end up with a brick occasionally. Or what they call the crumb. They're looking at the crumb, so they want air pockets is what they want. Okay, so we're going to start out with about 4 1/4 cups of flour. That's what that 1,000 grams is going to work out to. So it's going to make about 2 loaves. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then about 1/4. So there's my 4 1/4 cups flour in my bowl. Now I'm going to add almost 3 cups of water, 2.96 if you want to get exact. Or no, sorry, wrong. Yeah, 2.96. So that's about 700 grams, okay? So you want it sort of room temperature. I'm just using tap water. I'm not using my spring water. I use that for the starter, but I use tap water just for the bread itself. So there's 2 cups. And then I'm going to come slightly under 1 cup. Just a smidge under. It's almost there. Yeah, there we go. Because I always feel like when you're adding those 2 things in together, you can always add more if you need to. So now I'm going to take my spatula, And I'm just gonna mix the flour and water together a little bit. All right, just to get them sort of together. Then I'm gonna add a little bit of salt. So it's actually, how much salt was it? It's like 20%, 20 grams of salt. So for me, as the lazy kitchen witch, it's 3 or 4 good healthy pinches of salt. That's all it is. 1, 2, 3, 4. There. That's it. 4 healthy pinches of salt. Now for the starter, so you're going to add the starter in now. Now some chefs who want to take it down a very long road or bakers, will just do the water, flour, and salt and let it kind of come together. And then add the starter as a sort of a separate step. I do not do that. I will be doing the starter right now. It doesn't really matter. I've tried both methods. I like the one where I add it now because then it's just not an extra step I don't have to take kind of thing. And it's 150 grams of starter. So that works out to just over half a cup. Not quite 3/4 of a cup. It's actually 0.63 cups, okay? So I'm going to take a very healthy half cup here. And because it takes a little bit to get it out, I'm just going to add, there we go, just a wee little bit more. I'll get my spatula, my smaller one, scrape all this good starter out. Now my 10-year-old starter smells exactly like beer. So anytime I open it, it smells like I'm having a beer in the kitchen. You know, that yeasty smell that bread or that beer can get, that's what mine smells like. And my other starter that I started over there is starting to smell like that as well. Haven't seen any hooch on it yet, so, but you don't always get the hooch. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It just, it's a beast of its own. It becomes like a bit of a pet. And right now I have 2 pets and I'm feeding them both. And if anybody that's local wants starter, let me know because I can give you starter. And it does speed up the process a little bit. You'll still have to do sort of the 7-day thing of feeding it and whatnot, but it'll go a lot faster. Now that starter that I did there, I didn't start with one of my own starters. I started it right from scratch because I wanted to show you guys exactly how to do it right from scratch. But you can always get some starter and it does help to speed up. And it's great to get a starter if you've never made it before, because sometimes you're not sure what to look for. And by having an established starter that you're now feeding for your own, it makes it so there's fewer mistakes or fewer doubts, like is this going the way it's supposed to, that sort of thing. So I'm just mixing up this dough. Trying to get all the flour incorporated here because there's some in the bottom. It hasn't mixed in just yet. So like I said, this sourdough bread dough is a lot wetter than most doughs because most of the time you're used to a nice, you know, sort of malleable, smooth, shiny dough. You're not going to get that with the sourdough dough. Okay, so I've just kind of been folding it this whole time. I'm going to add a little more flour because it's a little wet today, wetter than it usually is. So I don't know if it's a change of season. But again, you kind of have to do it by eye, but you do have to understand that it is going to be a wet dough. And I'm going to show you here in a second. There we go. That's what I usually get. Okay. This is what I'm used to. So I'm going to bend the camera down here so you can see what I mean. So see, this is the dough. And when I put my fingers on it, it's really sticky. It's supposed to be like that. It's supposed to look like that. It's not a dough you're going to throw out on the counter and just kind of go at her and start kneading kind of thing, because it is extremely sticky. So what you're going to do is we're just going to take, you're just going to take a little bit of flour. Again, you don't want your board super covered. You just want a little bit. So don't over flour. That's one of the bigger mistakes that people tend to make. And you can see it's basically pouring out of here. It's not like a dough that's, you know, falling out of here. Smells really good. But it is a wet dough. So, you know that your fingers are going to get dirty and sticky with bread dough. I mean, that's not a bad thing. Much of this off as we can. Now, forgot to do this before, but one trick I learned, so I'm going to rinse my hands a little bit, and keep your hands wet, don't keep them dry, because one trick I learned from one baker was, and this is where your best friend's going to come in, because you're going to need this to help flip. I should have wet this down too. Because sourdough doesn't want a lot of flour added to it, you need to use water. Water is kind of your best friend along with your scraper here. And you'll see I'm just sort of folding it over onto itself. And what I'm doing is I'm activating, there's two things that make up the gluten in bread. It's a protein, gluten is. And what I'm doing is I'm starting to activate that so that the gluten will start to process. And sourdough bread is actually really good for very digestible gluten. I mean, I'm not saying that if you have the sensitivity that you should start eating sourdough, but those that are looking for less gluten, definitely sourdough is a way to go, one way to go, without being totally gluten-free. So you can see I'm just kind of folding it over, and it is starting to sort of come together. It's still going to be very wet. So don't be afraid of the wetness. Embrace the wetness. And you're going to be tempted to want to use flour. Not in this early stage of the game. Try not to do that. And what I'm doing with this kind of knead, this is like, obviously you're not going to be kneading a whole lot with your fingers. You're not going to be doing the hoof kind of kneading that you normally would do with other bread doughs. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to leave it here, because you just kind of leave it on the board for about half an hour. And then I'm going to come back to it, and I'm going to scrape it off completely, because you're allowing it to just process. So that's the first step. So I will see you after I wash my hands in about half an hour with another video on what to do as the next step. And then the next 3 steps are basically the same. So that's it for now, and I will stop and I will be back. Okay, bye.